Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Sorry that I'm late today.
Morning.
Okay, today's a hard day because it's a big subject today about cheese and the Rennert that's used to make cheese. So let's have a look.
Yosy, where are we starting from? I missed yesterday's stuff.
I believe today is Kuf Tesayin, which is 116.
Yeah, I know that, but where on the page?
I'm going to see if I can find it. We are up to Velifrich. So I have to go a little bit back because we're like sort of in the middle of something. So I'm going to turn back to Kuf Tes Vav page for a minute so that we could get the Hemshech of the Gemara. The Gemara had a large discussion as to how we know that Basar B'chalav is Asher B'achila, and how do we know that Basar B'chalav is Asher B'hana. So the Gemara yesterday brought several different mahalchim from several different Amoraim, but at towards the end we had a Gemara from Rish Lakish who said, "Oh, I'm in the wrong place. I'm sorry. I have to change the blot again." What does it? Now I'm in the right place. So towards the end, we had the Shita of Isi ben Yehuda, a Brisa. Isi ben Yehuda said, "How do I know that Basar B'chalav is Aser?" So he brought a Gzer Shova. Legabe the halacha of Basar B'chalav, it says Ki Am Kadosh Ata, and legabe the halacha of Treifa, it says Anshe Kodesh Tiyuli. And we have a Gzer Shova, just like Basar B'chalav Treifa is Aser B'achila, so too Basar B'chalav will be Aser B'achila. Zog to Gemara, and how do I know it's Aser B'hana? So for that, he brought a Kavachayim from Orla. Madach Orla, it's Aser B'hana, yet no one ever did an affair with it. That's no of a plant or of a fruit on the tree. The first 3 years, the pears are Aser B'hana. Nevertheless, it's still Aser B'hana. Basar B'chalav, where in order for it to become Basar B'chalav, an Isra had to be done, for sure it would be Aser B'hana. So we start off with a Kavachayim. Now that Kavachayim brought with it many complications. Complication number one that I brought with it is, if you have a Kavachayim to tell you that just like by Orla there's Isra Hana, so too by Basar B'chalav there should be an Isra Hana, so then why can't you use that same Kavachayim to tell you that just like by Orla there's an Isra Achila, so too by Basar B'chalav there's an Isra Achila, and why B'chalal do I need the Gzer Shov? So the Gemara says, the reason why I need a Gzer Shava is because you could have said that you don't have a Kavachayim. You watch your whole Kavachayim. It was Nevda Ba'isr, Basar B'chalav involved in Isr, surely it should be Asr. The problem is that's a faulty Kavachayim, because we have several examples of Nevda Ba'isr where there's no Isr Achila. For instance, Chayresh B'shara B'chamor Yachtov, or Choshim Pipara V'dashpa. In those two cases, you did an Isser. You weren't allowed to do this work on the farm with Klayim or with Chsimas Para, and you did. Nevertheless, the proceeds of that are mutter. So therefore, we have a problem with this Kavachayim. So we need a Gzer Shava to tell us, ignore that. Once you have a Gzer Shava, you can expand it further with the Kavachayim, and you won't slug up the Kavachayim. But the Gemara says, even without that, we have another upslug to the Kavachayim. And the upslug to the Kavachayim is what about Orla that never had a shasa kosher? Maybe the reason why Orla is also bano is because it never had a shasa kosher. Orla, from the moment it forms, it's also bano. Basa b'chalav only comes also bano later. So the Gemara said, yeah, you're right. We cannot rely on the kal v'chomer because you have a good upslug. The good upslug is Orla ein la shasa kosher, but chametz bepesach yechiach, because chametz bepesach had a shasa kosher before it was Pesach or before it was chametz. This was mutter, and then it became aser, and chametz bepesach is also bana. So right now, the limud that there's an isra anah by basa b'cholav is no longer from a kal v'chomer. It's from what's known as a ma'atzad, from two different halachas combined, chametz bepesach and orla. And if you say mal chametz bepesach, that there's a chiyuv kares, so therefore maybe there's an isra anah. Unlike basa b'cholav, we'll say arlo yechiach. And what if you say malo arlo shekein lo sasha kosher? I will say chametz b'pesach yechiach. And then you say v'chayzer adin lo yiroy uzeh karo uzeh. Carbon chametz b'pesach is not like arlo; it has certain chomers. V'lo yiroy uzeh karo uzeh, and arlo is not like pesach; it has certain chomers. But there is one thing they share in common: they both have an isra achila, and we say it's also asher b'adam. So too, basa b'cholav, which has an isra achila, will also have an isra. So then the Gemara asks, but we still have a problem. What is the problem? Zok to Gemara. I apologize because that's not what the Gemara said. That's what the Gemara could have said. But what the Gemara did say is, when the Gemara asked, Ma l'chametz b'pesach, shekein onish kares, what happened was the Gemara brought in a third halacha, the halacha of klai kerem. Klai kerem is ein onish kares for aser bana. So now, for some reason, the Gemara wasn't happy to learn it out of Pesach and Orla, which you could have. The Gemara decides to bring in Klayim as well. Now, Klayim and Orla have similar features in that they're both not Chayiv Kares. They have a difference because Klayim yesh b'shasa kosher, or we'll see about that. Klayim might or might not have a shasa kosher. Orla, we know for sure, does not have a shasa kosher, and chametz b'pesach, we know for sure has a shasa. And there's three things that we're learning it from. And the question is, why did the Gemara jump to Klayim? Why couldn't the Gemara just stick to the Mahatzad from Orla and from chametz b'pesach? That was the question that the Gemara had. So the Gemara said the reason why you couldn't just rely on Orla and chametz b'pesach to learn that there's an isra anah by basa b'cholav, because if it's a matzad, because I could have asked the kasha, ma la'atzad ha'shavah shabehen shekein gidulei karka. Chametz b'pesach is gidulei karka. It's wheat. It's barley. Orla is for sure gidulei karka, but basa b'cholav is not gidulei karka. So just because there's an isra hana by chametz b'pesach and by Orla, who said there would be a isra hana by basa b'cholav? Now, the first thing that should jump out at you is, what type of pircha is that? Normally, you ask a pircha, mala carbon pesach, mala chametz b'pesach, and Orla that both share a feature of chumrah, and that feature of chumrah could logically explain why it also has the chumrah of isra hana, which is absent by basa b'cholav. So by basa b'cholav mehech then it's also bana. But the fact that it's gedulei karka, that's a ramdin fact that it should have no implication or impact on whether or not there should be isra hana. So what type of kasha is, yes, similarity that chametz b'pesach shares with Orla when it's completely irrelevant to our shayla? Zokt Gemara, in the name of Rish Lakish, rule number one. We're going to learn three fundamental rules of kal v'chomer and of matzad. Rule number one is, whenever you make a matzad, parchinon koldum, you're allowed to ask a kasha by showing that these two items, A and B, who are going to be the source of the limit to teach C, If A and B has a similarity that C doesn't share, even though that similarity logically has no impact on the halacha that we're trying to share, it slugs up a matzah. On the other hand, if you have a kavachomer, you can only slug up the kavachomer if you find a logical reason why A should have this chomer and B shouldn't. But when it's a matzah, it doesn't have to be a logical reason. It could be a random fact. But Zok to Gemara, you can ask even from a pircha kolder. So first Gemara, so what does it help now to bring along Kalayim and that Kalayim to the mix? Kalayim also is Gedula Karka. So I still have the same problem. So where did I get out of this problem? So therefore, the Gemara tells us that there's three rules. When you have a Gzeir Shot, when you have a Kavachomer, you have to ask with logic. When you have merely a Ma'atzah with two things, then you can even ask a Pircha Koldahu and turn it on to Ardaf. Now, and when you have a third wheel, like you have Klayim together with Arla and together with Chametz B'Pesach, then in fact you can no longer ask the Pircha Koldahu. The third leg, which in our case is Klayim, now precludes us from asking a Pircha Koldahu. Now, even if there's a third leg, sometimes you could ask a Pircha Koldahu. When could you ask a Pircha Koldahu? Because let's say, if we would have said Mala Klayim, that has a third Mila. Like our law has an English Asakarish. Chametz B'Pesach is Chayiv Kares. Imagine Klayim would have had some third item why it would be different than the other two. And then you'd have to make a Salasham Shabbahen, that they're also Bachila and they're also Bana, who are in Chametz B'Pesach. If you were making a matzah with the third item as well, you could ask a Pircha Koldahu. But in this case, Klayim doesn't have any svar that should make a difference from Chametz B'Pesach or Orla, and therefore, since Klayim is there as a third option, loy parchinan Pircha Koldahu. So the whole purpose of Klayim is just that you shouldn't be able to ask Ma lahanich shechein gedulekar. And that's where we ended up yesterday with our three rule. Rule one, Kal V'Chomer, you have to ask with a svara. A ma'atzad, you could just ask with a simple difference in one detail. And if there's a third wheel, like Klayim, you need to ask now with Kula V'Chomer. Break the Gemara, the Lefler, maybe we could ask even with Kula V'Chomer, even with Klayim there. The Lifrach Mala Klaya Kerem, Shekain Loy Hoysa Lohen, Chasa Kosher. Klaya Kerem has the same problem as Arla, that it never had a Shasa Kosher. Because the Gemara is assuming that everything becomes also Bada. Amar of Adabarava, Zoysha Merish. You know what you can learn from here? That Klaya Kerem, Ikron, Desar, the Hoysel and Shasa Kosher. We had a little bit of a discussion yesterday. If you plant Klaya Kerem, do you say the new growth that grows out of it, that becomes Osir? Or do you say even the original seeds that you planted, even they're Osir, not just the growth? Zok the Gemara, from here you see that Klaya Kerem, even Ikra Nesar, even the two seeds that you planted become Osir Bano. And therefore, we could say that it has Shasa Kosher. Because before you planted these seeds, they, in fact, were kosher. It's only after you planted them that they became Osir Bano, and therefore they had a Shasa Kosher. If you learn only what grew becomes Osir by Klaya Kerem, then that grew never had a Shasa Kosher. But the fact that even the original seeds are going to become Osir when they're planted by Klayim shows us that those original seeds did have a Shasa. Hoyav and Shasa Kosher before they took. Okay, go on. Mosiv Rab Shmaya Bar Zeira. He wants to challenge this halacha that Ikron do not. We're saying the Ikron do become Osir. He wants to challenge. Zok the head of the Gemara. What happens if Hamaver Otzitz Nokov Beker? You have an Otzitz Nokov. You have a flower pot that has holes in it. So even though it's hovering above the ground, it's not buried in the ground. There's Wi-Fi. The nourishment from the earth goes through the air through Wi-Fi and actually gets into the flower pot. So you have in the flower pot, let's say chita and sa'ira, and then through Wi-Fi you have the shpa of the grapevines that are growing in the vine that you walk in the vineyard that you're walking through. Will that be an issue of Klein? So Amaver Otutz Nokov Bekerem Im Hoisef Mosayim Osir. If while you were going through the vine, it grew that now we have one part of Isser to 199 parts of Heter, because that little bit grew, Osir, it will become Osir. Hoisif in, only if there's actually additional growth, is it Osir. But loy hoisif, loy. If there was no additional growth, it wouldn't be Osir. So isn't that a klor raya? Isn't that a klor raya that the original is not Osir, only what grew is Osir? Zok Gemara, Amar Abaye, no. There's two ways that Klayim becomes Osir, depending on what the Klayim is. Trey Kroy Ksivi. In fact, there's two psukim in reference to Klayim that seem to be at first glance contradictory. Ksiv Pentikdash Hamalea. Maybe the growth will become Osir Vana. Malay is growth. And then it says Hazera, which means even the seed becomes Osir. So the question is, does just the growth become Osir, or does the seed itself become Osir? Let's have a look at the pasuk inside. Maybe the growth will become Osir. The plant, the seeds itself become Osir. So is that not somewhat contradictory? Let me explain to you how this works. If the way you're being overclimbed is you're planting lechatchila, 3 seeds, chita, sa'ira, and gefen, then it's not growth. The mere fact that the individual seedlings take root before there's any type of growth, that creates the issue. That's when even the zerah, the planted seed, is going to be awesome. But zerah uba, but if you already have saplings, so you have a flower pot that already has tiny little saplings of wheat and barley, and now you have a vine that you're walking through with your atzitnakav, zerah uba, then the way it becomes osher is by hoshev, it grows 1 to 100. Hoshev in, loy, hoshev loy. So now we know there's actually 2 ways to create the isser of klayaker. A is by planting it together. There it becomes osher, ashrasha, there the seeds themselves become osher, and then a shasa culture. Or if you already have saplings that you put together, then the isser comes by the growth. Zok to Gemara Vayta. Masnisin the loiki haitan. Our Mishnah will not be consistent with the Tana we're about to put. The Tanya Rab Shimon ben Yehuda Aimer Mishum Rab Shimon, Basar b'chalav Asur b'achila mutabana. Our Mishnah said that Basar b'chalav is Asur b'ana, but we have a Tana by the name of Rab Shimon ben Yehuda. Well, it's Basar b'chalav is mutabana. Shenemar, it says in the pasuk, Ki am kadosh ata, in reference to Basar b'chalav. But never la'alon, and by Treifa it says Ma'anji kadosh tiyuli. Mal alone, it's only Asur b'achila mutar b'ana by a Treifa. Afghan Asur b'achila mutar b'ana. And I guess he doesn't make the kalvachoiners that we had from Isi ben Yehuda on Amid Aleph. Okay, Gavaltic. Now, I just wanted to point out that I saw a big chiddush in this Gemara that we just learned. I always thought that Haisef Masayim, which is what triggers the Isser of Playa Kerem, Haisef Masayim, that's the trigger to make everything awesome. But Rashi tells us that's not how Haisef Masayim works. Haisef Masayim works is because once it's Haisef Masayim, the growth part that's Usr is now mixed in with the original, which is not Usr, but Kalayim you need 200 to 1 to be able to outnumber. And if it's Haisef Masayim, it's only 199 to 1. So the rest is not Usr because it's really Usr al Kalayim. The rest is only Usr because there's Isser of Kalayim mixed into it that's not but. And that's what Haisef Masayim is about. I always thought Haisef Masayim, that's the trigger to make everything awesome. But that's not Pshat, Rashi says. Haisef Masayim is enough that little bit that grew won't be bottled in the 199. That's why it's awesome. That explains our Gemara. If that was the method with which we had Isser, then only the growth is Osir, the rest is only Osir because it's mixed, because Isser mixed into it. But if you planted seeds and they took root, now the seeds themselves become Osir. My Rabbi Yosy Aglili Omer never loisler. So if you look, you have Rabbi Akiva and you have Rabbi Yosy Aglili, and they both learn to lafuke oifos, right? Rabbi Akiva said Kai is also not included.
Yes, I think you skipped Rabbi Akiva. Go up a few lines.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did. Thank you very much. Rabbi Akiva Omer Chayev Oif. Frank the Gemara. How could you tell us that Gedi tells you Gedi v'loy Chayev, Gedi v'loy Oif? We already used Gedi. Shmuel had a whole list of 6 things that we learned from the 3 Gedis. Right? He used to tell you Gedi, including Chaya, Gedi, including Chalev. We had all those Limudim a couple of days ago from Shmuel. So to Gemara, Kasavar Rabbi Akiva is your Chalal Isser. Rabbi Akiva holds by default Isser Chalal Isser. So I don't need any special Limudim for Chalev, and I don't need any special Limudim for Nevela, for Mason. So for there, let's use it. So that's why I have 2 extra. Shalil, where Shmuel used 1 Gedi to say even a fetus. Rabbi Akiva says Gedi Malyu. I don't need a limit for that. Why is it different than any other Gedi? A fetus is a Gedi. So therefore, he has all of the 3 Gedis that Shmuel needed. He has them available. So one will use Prat L'Chaya, the other one will use Prat L'Oif, and the third one will use a Prat L'Meimah. So basically, it's merely a difference of opinion as to what the default is, and therefore what you have available to learn from the 3 Gedis. So at the end of the Gemara. Now, Rabbi Akiva learned Lafuke Oif from Gedi. Rabbi Yosy Aglili said Lafuke Oif because it says Bachalev Imoy, and a bird doesn't give milk. So, first Gemara, is there a chiluk in the halacha between Rabbi Yosy Aglili, who learns it from Bachalev Imoy, and Rabbi Akiva, who excludes Oif from Gedi? Ma'ika ben Rabbi Yosy Aglili Rabbi Akiva. So, Gemara Ika benayu Chaya. The difference is a Chaya. Rabbi Yosy Aglili Savar Chaya is Isser was a holiday, right? So Rabbi Akiva Savar Chaya is the Rabbana. Iboy Yisema. Oif Ika benayu. There's even a nafkamina in how they approach Oif. Rabbi Akiva Savar Chaya Oif Einan Min HaTorah. Rabbi Akiva's words, if you look at his words in the Mishnah, it's Chaya Oif Einan Min HaTorah. That's very telling. That sounds very much like there's an Isser D'Rabbana. Rabbi Akiva Savar Chaya Oif Einan Min HaTorah. Hamid D'Rabbana Nasiri. Because when you look at Rabbi Yosy Aglili, he doesn't mention of anything midna Torah. He just says oif is not included. So actually, Rabbi Akiva would be machmer because he would hold basar oif in milachix is also midra. Rabbi Yosy Aglili holds lechatchila you can eat it. Tanya namihachi. We learned in the Brisa. Ben Kaimel Rabbi Eliezer, are you cursing eitzim lasois pchamin lasois pars? In Rabbi Eliezer's city, he held that not only were you allowed to do a mitzvah on Shabbos, for instance, you were allowed to do bris milah on Shabbos, but you were allowed to do all the preparations, even the pre-preparations you are allowed to do on Shabbos in order to make a bris. So if you didn't even have a knife, you can actually mine raw iron ore, and you could cut down trees to create a kiln to melt the metal and form a knife. You're even allowed to do that on Shabbos to prepare for a bris. That's not relevant to our sugya. But in the place of Rabbi Yosy Aglili, they would eat chicken with milk. They would eat that. Levi showed up at the home of Yosef Rishma. They brought him to eat. Reisha, a head, Tiyusa b'chalb. Tiyusa, Rashi says a pshat, but the Arshkol, I believe, teaches that Tiyusa is a puoin. The Arshkol teaches it as a peacock, the head of a peacock in milk. Shlomi, does the Hebrew say peacock as well? The English Arshkol, I believe, says peacock. So that's what they served him. V'loy Omar Luhu V'loy Midi. And Rabbi Yosef didn't, and Levi didn't say anything. But they didn't tell. Levi didn't say anything. Rebbe, when he came in front of Rebbe, Amar Lei, Rebbe asked Levi, I don't understand. They served you basa b'chala. Amai loy tishmetinu. You should have put them in cher. They served you basa b'chala. Amar Lei, Levi told back to Rebbe, Atre Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseru. This was the city of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseru, where I was served up oif with milk. V'amina, and I said, Dorish Luke Rabbi Yosef Glili. They learn like Rabbi Yosef Glili. The Amar Yatza Oiv Shein Loy Chalavim, and in that city, it was under the psak of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseru, who held like Rabbi Yosef Glili, that lechatchila you're allowed to eat oif b'chalav, and that's why I assume they served it to me. So who am I to make a demonstration to protest against it if that was acceptable in that city? Okay, now we're getting into a whole new sugya, cheese making. Kevas oived kicha. What if I took the Rennert from a goy? So Rennert is partially digested milk that you find in one of the four stomachs in the keva of an animal, and that is a highly charged substance that is like it's like yeast to dough. Just like when you want to be machmitz dough, you use yeast. When you want to start curdling milk to make cheese, you use Rennert, which is found in the stomach of an animal. So are you allowed to buy this?
Is that considered milchiks or fleischiks? Rennert.
It's considered milchiks. So the question is, are you allowed to go buy Rennert from a goy? You're just taking this chemical. So the halach is keves ovid b'chavim v'shel nevela. If it's from a goy or from a nevela, the Gemara is going to ask. Every time you take something from a goy, the assumption is that it's an nevela, because a goy who slaughters his animal, even if he's an expert shaykhid, it's still an nevela. So the Gemara, keves ovid b'chavim v'shel nevela harei zu asura. It's actually asura. You're not allowed to use the Rennert that you get from a goy. Raj just keva, zeu cholav korish shebesecha keva. It's not the keva itself, it's the Rennert, but it's referred to as keva. So how do they refer to the stomach itself? If I wanted to use the stomach itself to pour my milk into create cheese, that's ba'or shel keva. Hamamid ba'or shel keva, if you soak your milk in the keva itself, in the stomach itself, Rashi says that's basar already. So now your mom is soaking milk in basar. So amamid ba'ar shel keva. The halacha is now. If you notice, there's a word the keva kshera in the keva of even a kosher animal. Because if you're discussing basar b'chalov, then even if it's a kosher animal, it's a problem. However, if you look at the Bach, you'll see he takes out the word kshera, and it's only talking about a non-kosher animal. And this is going to involve some big, massive machlokes rishonim that we will get into. So let's turn out to Amud Beis.
Is this Rennert a liquid or a solid?
That's such a gewaltige question. That is such a gewaltige question. Pashtus, it looks like it's like a cottage cheese consistency, but there's going to be a massive machlokes about this Rennert, and the Rebbeinu Tam is going to come up the middle. And he's going to exactly make your distinction, if it's watery or if it's really thick. And that'll make a huge difference, halachically, what it is. So we're going to get into that. So, im yesh b'noisen tam.
So, sorry, Yossi, the case of the milk inside the stomach, the Rennert was inside there already? It was the same stomach that had
that's
the
how
Rennert.
It became Rennert. It was in the stomach. It was in the stomach of an animal. Correct. So you're asking me why is it that possible?
Right.
Very good question. It's an excellent question. So all this is we're going to end up having to go through with the Shita Rishon. So I'll give you the Cole's notes, because if you look at the long Rashi here on Amud Beis, Rashi gave us the full version. So I'll give you the Cole's notes. There's actually a big machlokes rishonim if Rennert is pirsha ba'alma. If you look at like excrement, and the Rif holds lamaisa, you look at Rennert like excrement. If you look at it like excrement, the excrement of a treif animal, there's no Isra Achila. So therefore, Rennert by definition is not even considered a food, it's excrement, and therefore you can use it no matter what, because there's no problem of chalav on it. There's no problem of a behemoth tmeya on it. There's no issue with it. That's the sheet of the Rif. Rashi vehemently argues on it. And you could see Rashi is a long Rashi, vehemently argues, and he holds that the Gemara says in Avodah Zarah that it's Pirsha Ba'alma. That doesn't mean to say that it's dirt. It just means to say that we don't say that it's part of the meat. You say it's its own thing. And Rabbeinu Tam comes up the middle and says it depending on the consistency of the Rennert, which is exactly what Shlomi said earlier. So let's learn the sugya and then it'll come out clear, rather than try to go through all the details before we understand the background.
I don't think Rabbi Yosef Rennert would like the Rif's.
Whoa.
That was a very cheesy comment.
Whoa.
Okay, Sakta Gemara Vayta. You know how I was holding myself back from saying something about Yossi Rennert? Okay, Sakta Gemara. But once you cut the cheese, it lets it all out. Sakta Gemara Vayta. If there's going to be a tam of bosa in the milk that you poured into the stomach to help it curdle, it will be awesome. You have a kosher animal that drank milk, and the mother that it drank its milk from turned out to be a treif animal. That milk is osher.
How are we defining that treifa? The way that we understand treifa today, or in the time of treifa is if a kosher animal.
Maybe the mother's leg was cut off in her kuva l'mayla.
So that
it was a treifa, but it
was a kosher animal.
It was a kosher animal, but the milk was from a treifa. We drink all milk. We're not kosher at the treifa. But if you know that an animal is a treifa, you're not allowed to drink the milk from it.
Okay, yeah.
So this milk is now in the stomach of the child. So
we translated a treifa animal as non-kosher, right?
Right, not a baby tomato, not from a.
Okay.
It's not like a calf drank milk from a horse.
Right.
The calf drank milk from a cow, but the cow was ill. So the halach is kshera sheyinakam in a treifa or sheyinkam in a treifa kevas asura. The rennet in its stomach, if you shut it and cut it open, will be osur because that's formed from a milk of a treifa. But on the flip side, treifa sheyinkam in a kshera kevas muteres. When you're eating its Rennert, you're not eating from an animal that's treifa. You're eating milk from the animal that was kshera. So you don't look at the container in which you found the milk. You look at who made the milk. If the milk was made by a kosher animal, a non-treifa animal, then you can eat it. And if not, no. Frank the Gemara, right away in the Mishnah gives us two options: keva of a goy or keva of a nevela. Frank the Gemara, atu kevas oivet gechavim lav nevela. Isn't the keva of a goy, anything that you get from a goy is going to be a nevela? A goy doesn't have shchita. We're talking about somebody who purchased a live animal from a goy. And nevertheless, kevas oivet gechavim will still be osur. Why? I bought an animal from a goy. I shecht it. Why would there be any problem with it? Because I'm afraid that before I bought this little calf from the goy, it was drinking mother's milk, and its mother happened to have been a treifa. And therefore, the rennet that's in the animal now, because I shechted it right away, I didn't wait 4 days for that to be flushed out, and now there's new milk in the system. Rather I shechted it right away. So that means whatever I find the contents in the stomach of that animal was from milk it drank from its mother by the goy yesterday. And how do I know that animal that it drank from was not a treifa? Is that a real chashash that we have to be worried that maybe an animal drank from a treifa? But tonight we learn the You're allowed to go first thing in the morning to a chicken farm that's operated by a goy, and you can ask the guy, I want to buy a dozen eggs from you. You don't have to be chayshish that there's any problem over here. So why do I need to be worried by a egel that drank milk from a treifa? I'm afraid that this egel might have been nourished from a horse, from an animal that's not kosher. And that I am chayshish. Why? You're not worried that it was yonik from a treifa, but you are worried that it was yonik from a behemoth tmeya. Dr. Moore, there's a big difference. Treifa loy shchicha. It's very uncommon to have an animal that's treifa, that's nursing. So that's why we're not worried about it. But tmeya, go and have on old McDonald's farm, you have all different types of animals. Many of them are not kosher. Tmeya shchicha. So frankly, Gemara is shchicha. Even on the Jewish farm, how do we know that the egel didn't drink milk from the horse? So to Gemara, Anan, the Badlinan Minayu, we separate out behemoths tmeyos from mingling with our behemoths chairs, because we don't want something like this to happen. And if we see a horse gets mixed in to the stall with the cows, we'll quickly take him out. So by us, we don't have to be gozer in the odd event that could have occurred. But in Goyim, they let the animals mingle, they don't care. If there's a horse running around amongst the cows, they don't see a need to separate them. So now there's much more of a chance that this can occur. Rabbanan said that you cannot use the Rennert from a Gedi that you bought from a Goy, because you don't know who is the mother, who's the source of that. That was teretz number 1 of our Mishnah, why there's 2 cases, Shal Oivit Kachavim and the Shal Nevel. But Shmuel says it's really one case. Shmuel Omer Chado Katani, Kevas, Shchitas, Oivit Kachavim, Nevela. That's exactly what it's saying. If you take the rent from an animal that was killed by a goy, that has the din of a nevela. Frank the Gemara, we armor Shmuel Haki. Did Shmuel actually say that you're not allowed to eat the Rennert of an animal that you got from a goy? But it seems that Shmuel said elsewhere otherwise. We armor Shmuel. We know that Gevinas Oivd Gechavim is osher. Why did the Rabbanan say you're not allowed to eat cheese that you buy from a goy? You know why you can't? Because they don't just mix Rennert into it. That's not the problem. The problem is they actually make the cheese by filling up the keva with milk. And the actual keva itself, the actual meat of the keva itself, is being impacting the cheese and making it into cheese. That's much worse. It has a bleed directly from the nevela. Hakeva gufa, it's mashma that the Rennert itself wouldn't be a problem. It's only because they actually use the keva itself to form the cheese. So how could Shmuel say that the keva of a nevela, the keva from a goyish animal, is a problem? Why should it be a problem? Shmuel only is concerned about the actual meat of the keva that you put the milk into. Hakeva gufa shari. So you're right. Loikasha kan kodim chazara kan al acher chazara. So there was actually a scenario in the Mishnayos where there was a change made, and if we quickly look at Rashi about this chazara, let's see what happened over here. So kan kodim chazara. Zok Rashi beperek ein ma'amidin in Maseches Avodah Zarah. Shol Rabbi Shmuel is Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Shmuel asked Rabbi Yeshua the following question: why is it also to eat non-kosher cheese, non-Jewish cheese? They use the goyish Rennert. That was the first Mishnah, that the goyish Rennert is a problem. They use Rennert of a goy. That was the original thought. So Rabbi Shmuel told Rabbi Shua, I don't understand. Would you not agree that eating kachim is more chomer than eating the veil? Now the halacha is v'amru kol koyin shedaita yafa sarfa chaya. A koyin could take a carbon oil, which has to be kul lemizbeach, and if he could stomach it, he's allowed to eat the Rennert that he can remove from the stomach of the carbon oil. So the problem is, clearly that's not considered part of the animal. Because if it was, how would the kohen be able to eat? Amr Loi told him, you're right. Not because they use Rennert from a regular cow, that's nevela, rather they use Rennert from avodah zarah, from an animal that they service avodah zarah. Almo, what do you see from here? Chazer boy mikevas nevela. You see right away that Rabbi Yeshua was chazer from the fact that he said using the Rennert from a nevela is a problem. Why? Why was he chazer? We should delav gufahi, because that's not part of the animal. You don't look at the Rennert that's in the stomach of a nevela as if in itself is nevela. Well, asura mishum avodah zarah. The reason why it's also avodah zarah, it's not part of the avodah zarah either. The teretz is that afilu pirshadi de also. Even the gedolim, the rei, the tsoya that's in the stomach of an avodah zarah is asur b'ano. You know why it's asur b'ano? If the animal is full of rei, it looks fatter. So when you're bringing it as a carbon, it looks like you're bringing a fatter behemoth. So even the rei is part of what's honoring the avodah zarah. But surely it's not part of the meat of the animal. So therefore, the Rennert that comes from a non-kosher animal, or even if it comes from a nevela, there's no problem with it because it's not meat. It's not part of the animal. It's just like dirt. Hilchach nishnaseinu zois nishnis kodim chazar. Our Mishnah that says you're not allowed to use Rennert from a goy, that's before the chazara. That was the first shot in Rabbi Yeshua. But umishamachi asar. That's why our Mishnah asers. V'chi itmar de Shmuel the or keva hu the asar hakeva shari. That was la'acher chazara come. So in fact, our Mishnah is an obsolete edition. So why didn't we change the Mishnah? Why did we leave in print? Why did Rebbe leave in print something that's not accurate la'alacha? So Rashi umishnashenu zois mechibon shenishnis afapisha chazer boy loy zozim im kaima v'loy solkua v'loy armu shaloi l'shnoisai. Once it was written down, we do not retract it. We leave it as is, and we left. But halacha l'maisa, Rennert is not a problem because Rennert is considered like gedolim. Now, this is where the bas of machlokes rishonim is. Rashi says the other rishonim, like the Rif, learns like it's mamish gedolim. If it's mamish gedolim, you should be able to use it from a non-kosher animal. It doesn't matter; it's refuse. But Rashi says chas v'sholem to learn that way. It's not refuse at all. When the Gemara says pirsha ba'alma, that it's not called milk anymore, but it's still not garbage. So if you look at the first wide line in Rashi, la bishum de keva pirsha chashav lo lidin equal the davik pirsha that it's not even food lemifka shem chalav b'nei. All it's saying is alahaki ma'isirai mina mida aser keva savach kechavim shmamina pirsha aser. You see, even refuse is aser. The kevasa nami lav gufahi. It's not part of the animal. Umitzah mishum de nichalei benapach kishabeheman mira shmeina v'yafal avodah zarah. Hudin l'sharach. Zokt Rashi with the shari lagabe oila. They want to say like mitzvah elagufa. Aval pirsha is shari. It's dirt is mutter. Ki hagavna then kedusha chaloi el laroi miben lemizbayach. Because by an oila, the only part that kedusha is chalav is the part that you're makriv, not the Rennert. But Zok Rashi, you don't say a fazoifai that it's not food at all. It's food. It's just not part of the animal. So that's the big machlokes. The Riv learns it's not food at all, and therefore there's no issue with using it. Rashi learns no, about it's food, and it would be subject to the isurim of basar b'cholav. It'll be subject to isurim, or even if it's not cholav anymore, but it's still subject to the isurim that it has in it. It comes from the nevela, and therefore it would still be awesome. So that is the fundamental machlokes between Rashi and the Rif, whether or not Rennert becomes osir. And if you look at Tosfos very quickly, you'll see the And Rashi and Tosha speaks out at the end. If it's liquid, there we'll say that it's not going to be pirsha, and therefore it'll be usher to use. If it's really hardened already, even if it's salted in the cave, it's going to be mutter. We'll get into more detail tomorrow because it's already late. We didn't even get down to the Mishnah. So we'll pick this up tomorrow, and then I'll go through the long Rashi more, and we'll see the sheet of the Rif better, the sheet of Rashi better, and we'll see exactly where it chaps enough kamina. Because if it's pirsha excrement, or if it's pirsha milk but not part of the animal, where is there enough kamina? Why does that create enough kamina lalocha in the cheese that you make out of it? That we'll see tomorrow.
Yeah.
Good.